Hello, everybody, and welcome to Climate and Cuisine, a podcast for climate diet. My name is Jane DeMarines, and I'm the Executive Director of Climate Diet. And my guest today is Sydney Pryor. She's a postdoctoral research associate and lecturer in the Department of Exercise and Nutrition Sciences at the Milken Institute School of Public Health at George Washington University. And I'm going to look at my notes here. Her research explores the complex relationship between the U.S. agri-food system and human and planetary health, with a focus on high rates of red and processed meat consumption as a key driver of climate change and diet-related chronic disease. Sydney, welcome.
Thank you so much, Jane.
We're so excited
Good
to
to
have
be
someone
here.
like you who's already in our corner because kind of work you do is certainly related to what we're trying to do in creating awareness on the impact of really red meat and the amount of dairy also that contributes to climate change in this country. So it's great to have you here with the kind of research you've done and what you're bringing to your students. So let's get right to it. What is it that
Yeah.
brought you to this research topic? Because it's narrow and it's really fairly new.
Yeah, great question to kick us off. So, I actually started my academic journey really focused on nutrition and childhood obesity. So, I was really at that individual level, focusing on, cause and effect as it relates to food. And I think as I went on, I became a little bit frustrated with this framing because there's so many things that contribute to what we eat and why we eat it and how it makes us feel and how it impacts the environment. And so when I became increasingly interested in climate change, I kind of realized that food represented this like untapped win-win potential for humans and the planet. But at the same time, I think changing people's behavior is really hard, especially when it comes to food because we love food. And we have so many feelings behind the things that we eat and memories and things like that. And so for my dissertation, for my PhD, I wanted to focus on just one piece of, the food system puzzle that if I had to tell people to change one thing or try to focus on changing one thing about folks' diet, like that would have the biggest impact, what would that be? And so I focused on beef because of the things that you already mentioned, but it's really like the one piece of the diet, particularly in the US, that has the most promise, I guess you could say, in terms of if we reduce it, it has wins for climate and wins for health.
Having impact, yeah, absolutely, and totally agree with you. And sort of a follow-up to that and digging into it a little bit deeper. Well, what do you see as harder, getting people to change eating habits because they see the health benefits, since you started with nutrition as your focus, or is it the fear, particularly among young people, of the further climate impacts that drive change
Mm.
from what they eat?
Yeah, another great question. And I think it immediately brings up a great point about like it really depends on who you're talking to and what motivates people. I do think young people, particularly having taught like undergrad and grad students, young people are really motivated by that climate impact and understanding how their choices impact the environment, whereas other demographics of folks might have different motivations. And so I think that it kind of depends on who we're talking to, how we want to frame this. But I do think that this sense of hope and inclusion of plant-based diets is really a win in the sense that we need to kind of move away from this like loss framing to more of an asset framing where like plant-based diets and plant-based foods generally, even if they're part of diets that include meat, really provide all of these benefits rather than, thinking about it as we're taking something away.
I couldn't agree with you more. In it's, I think any message, if you start from a negative, it feels like not a win-win. That people, there's a lot of negativity around us right now in this country, I think. And so I totally agree with the messaging and trying to go from a more sort of hopeful standpoint. Your research suggests that the barriers people see to becoming more of a plant-based eater, consumer relate to the cost of plant-based food, the taste of plant-based food, and the availability. And do you see those barriers? And I think those are real. Some of those, I feel, the more you get into it, they're not barriers because well, they're just not. But do you see this as age specific in any way, or just comment on those and anything related to how you see it being perceived when you look at age as part of it?
Mm-hmm. So yes, I think taste and price and accessibility of food are the key drivers of what folks choose to eat, regardless of whether it's plant-based or not, but it also applies to plant-based foods. Research shows us that if plant-based foods tasted better, cost less, even though we actually know that plant-based diets do cost less, that's kind of a myth that needs to be busted. And if they had better access to plant-based foods, they'd be more likely to eat it. And so I think those are three great areas that we can focus on going forward. Like I said, rather than that kind of lost framing, like how do we get plant-based foods to be perceived as tasting better and costing less and all these things. But I definitely think that age does play a factor. I think the biggest one is that, and maybe not even related to taste and cost and all of these things, but young people are really more comfortable with the idea of trying plant-based foods and trying new things generally when it comes to food. And perhaps this has always been a thing, just that when you're younger, you're a little more ambitious maybe, and then you get, stuck in your ways as you get older and you like the things you like, and that's fine. But research does show that Gen Z and millennials too are way more open to plant-based diets and plant-based eating as a part of, a diet that does include meat too. So kind of that flexitarianism.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. Some people may get into it though who have suffered if they have doctors that are more aware of the benefits of health. Like New York City, 6 public hospitals are using plant-based foods to treat chronic health conditions. It's amazing. And that's because Mayor Adams became, well, he lost his sight. I don't know if you know his story. I'm sure you do, that he lost his sight and he tried to look at his alarm clock one morning and he couldn't see it. And he had gone at least partially blind. And somebody introduced him to vegan eating and he lost, I don't know how many pounds. He was very overweight at the time and it brought back his sight. And so he had the ability to implement it in the public hospitals in New York. So it's really great when that happens. And not that he his a part of losing his sight, but certainly when he implemented it in places that have impact, like big hospitals, so more
Mm-hmm.
people get exposed to it.
You also,
But
yeah, that brings up a great point about like having motivated leaders and getting stories like this to motivated leaders. Like, I feel like a lot of times decision makers, policymakers, whoever it might be, might not even realize that food is a climate action. And so putting people in these kinds of positions that care about the climate and kind of know about this connection, or us as advocates, like talking to policymakers to try to make this connection, is really important too.
yeah, absolutely. And I've started researching the advisory committees at the Department of Agriculture. And I don't know, they're very oriented toward business, really. I haven't seen one that seems easy to get this message into, but maybe I don't know if you've ever looked at those, because that would be a key place. I mean, they're about, I mean, the food and nutrition guidelines come out of there. They are better this year than ever in the past. I'm not sure how often they update them. Do you know that, how often the guidelines get updated?
Yep, so it's every 5 years
Okay.
that the advisory committee comes together and develops research questions with public input, and then it gets basically that report gets turned back over to the USDA and HHS to actually make the recommendations and make the guidelines. So we won't actually know for another couple months what they recommend. But the advisory committee's report has moved plant proteins into the protein category, whereas previously they were in the vegetable category. So that's a win to begin with.
Yeah, that's huge. I haven't looked at it because I think when they came out, it's been maybe 3 months or something like that. And our organization commented on them at that time, but I haven't paid attention to that in a little while. But I
Yeah.
know there was a step forward, so I'm glad to have you mention that for our viewers and listeners. So just moving on, and this gets into age a little bit. There was a recent Rutgers survey of 20,000 people in the United States. They said that 46, or the results were that 46% of those surveyed had plans to reduce their meat consumption, and another 45% said they planned to reduce their dairy. I do think it had to do that the survey skewed younger, and I couldn't find the actual data. It wasn't just of Rutgers students, however, it was 20,000 people in the United States. But what do you see as that? Do you believe that that is sort of a valuable survey? It's futuristic. We'll all make plans and say, yeah, I'm going to clean the house today. And someone invites you to go to the movies and that plan just went out the window, or your boss says, I need that paper. Anyway, do you see that as valuable or believable, that survey?
I think so, in the sense that, under all the right conditions, maybe people would be willing to reduce their meat consumption. But I also think being under the right conditions is really hard sometimes, given that our environment really sets us up to fail, in the sense that meat is the default everywhere we go, in the grocery store, in restaurants, in institutional dining facilities, all that kind of thing. But I do feel like that's also an opportunity. Like, even though maybe I don't necessarily believe that everyone in that survey that said they were going to reduce their meat consumption is going to do it today, it means that if we change environments, whether it's through like changes in architecture, nudges, defaults, changes in procurement, maybe some of those people that have the intention to reduce their meat consumption actually will.
Well, that's good. And I agree with you, because I think I have 3 daughters and 2 out of the 3 are vegan. So that just tells me in my own little survey that 2/3 of the population are going to be vegan.
Yeah,
I
I
really
love
don't believe
that.
that, but it does tell me that the younger generation is really considering it. And one of my daughters is actually the reason that I'm vegan, but there were some other factors too. But I definitely think the younger generation, they are forming their habits, as you pointed out, and they're thinking about it, and they can't I'm sure they do not have blinders on when it comes to climate change. We're seeing it everywhere. If they live in California, they may have friends that were victims of the fires out there in one way or the other, or just maybe they travel some of the roads that are near the mudslides that were around Big Sur. So people, see it in their own lives. So people living in Florida, where the roads are now have to be elevated because of the ocean coming across highways. My one daughter lives in Tampa, and I was there right after a big rainstorm, and we couldn't take a certain road that we took all the time because the water was coming up over it, and it was near the bay, Tampa Bay, but it was so much higher than the bay. It was hard to believe the water was flooding that high up. So I've seen it. I definitely have seen it. So I think, people.
I was just going to mention like that. You bring up a great point, which is that young people also have so much more access to information and to like seeing people's stories about climate change now, that it becomes, I think, more real than it has previously. Like, people go on TikTok and Instagram, and even the news is so much more accessible, just to see maybe how it's impacting people far away from them, and kind of give them that sense of urgency in a way that we didn't really have before.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point. And I'm not sure I thought about this so much, but it does seem there's much more reporting and people on the news And when they get to the weather, they're often saying it's related to climate change more than in the past. And I think it's not everybody, that's saying that, but definitely, and as you point out, the other things like TikTok and videos and just information on the internet. So yeah, that extremely good point. Um, there's so much that we could talk about here, but this is sort of a final wrap-up question, if you're willing, or if there's another area you would like to just mention before we go to the last question. Is there anything that you think we've missed that you would like to add for our listeners and viewers?
I think the main thing would just be that the majority of people do care about climate change. And so that's again like an opportunity, but the missed opportunity is that a lot of people don't know the connection between food and climate. And so I think, and this kind of gets at maybe like, what do we do as individuals? But I think really talking about it like this podcast, but also talking about it with your friends and family and just learning what you can about it is super important.
Well, so this touches on that. So maybe you just want to add a little bit to what you said, but what is your hope for the planet? And what do you have to say to our listeners and viewers is the best possible advice you can give with your knowledge and study and research?
Yeah, great question. Kind of a hard question because there's so many different things I could say. But I do feel like there's a lot of momentum in this area in research and in policy. And so that's really fun to see is just, what people are doing to try to solve this wicked problem that we have in society. And a lot of people do care about it. So I think that's a main takeaway is like not to feel bogged down by the fact that maybe it seems like some people don't care, or that our default has still not shifted away from meat consumption. But at the same time, I also think, like I said, the main thing that we can do is talk about it and try to like get the word out in a way that is inclusive of people who might not be vegan or vegetarian, but just really framing all of this in a way that is like, look at what we can do together, even though it's an individual choice, what we eat every day. I think that it can also kind of bring us this sense of community that I feel that we've kind of been missing as a society. Like food really connects us. And so I think, yeah, going forward, this can be a way that we pull together community as well as climate action.
That is such a hopeful message. I'd like to thank you for being a part of this today and for all the work that you do and to sharing your knowledge and for being somebody that wants to change the messaging because the messaging is so important. So thank you so much for all of your work and research and continuing focus to help make our planet more livable and lasting. So that wraps it up today. We're so pleased to have had Sydney Pryor with us, a lecturer and postdoctoral research associate with the Milken Institute School of Public Health at George Washington University. And thank you all for tuning in today to Climate and Cuisine, a podcast of Climate Diet. This is Jane DeMarines. Bye, everybody.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.